Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're heading back, way back to the late Cretaceous. We're focusing on a really fascinating dinosaur, Avimimus.
The bird mimic. Yeah, it's a good one.
Exactly. So we've dug into the sources, mostly drawing from a detailed Wikipedia entry that pulls together loads of paleontological research.
Scientific papers, books, the usual suspects when piecing together these ancient lives.
And our mission, as always, is to pull out the really compelling stuff for you, the surprising bits, the key insights about what this creature was like.
Right. What do we actually know about it? Or well, what do we think we know based on the bones?
Good point. Okay, let's start there. Why Avimimus? What makes it stand out?
Well, like you said, the name itself, Avimimus Latin for bird mimic, kind of gives it away, doesn't it?
It does.
It just has this suite of features that, especially early on, really got people talking about that whole dinosaur to bird connection. Very bird-like in some ways.
Absolutely. And the discovery story itself is pretty interesting. Russian paleontologists were behind the initial finds.
That's right, Dr. Sergei Kirsanov. He gave the first official description back in 1981.
And our source mentions there was even some early confusion about exactly where the first bones came from, right?
Yeah, that happens sometimes. Kirsanov initially pegged them to the Jadakta Formation,
Okay.
but later research, looking more closely at the geology, pointed towards the Nemec Formation being more likely. Watabe and others suggested that in 2006, I think.
So a bit of geological detective work after the fact.
Exactly. Science refining itself. And speaking of early ideas, the first specimen, the one Kirsanov described, it was incomplete.
Right. I saw that. Missing the tail.
Missing the tail, which understandably led Kirsanov to think, well, maybe Avimimus didn't have a tail.
Which would be pretty unusual for a theropod dinosaur.
Very unusual. But it shows how you work with what you've got, right?
Yeah.
You find a piece, you interpret it.
Until you find more pieces.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And thankfully they did. A second, nearly complete specimen turned up in 1996, described a few years later.
And that one did have tailbones.
Yep, caudal vertebrae confirmed. So Avimimus definitely had a tail. There were even some footprints found nearby later on, thought to belong to it. More evidence building up.
Okay, but then the story gets even better, doesn't it? The bone bed.
Yes. The 2006 discovery, Phil Curry's team. That was huge.
Finding remains of at least 10 individuals altogether.
Yeah, imagine that. A whole group of Avimimus in one spot in the Nemec Formation. Just an incredible find.
What did that tell us? Were they young, old?
That was interesting. They were all either adults or subadults. And the adults, they were all pretty much the same size.
Oh, okay. So they didn't just keep growing bigger and bigger.
Seems not. It suggests determinate growth, basically reaching a full adult size and then stopping. Like birds, actually, or us.
Not like, say, a crocodile that keeps growing.
Right. But finding so many together, well, that immediately makes you think about behavior.
Definitely. Were they social animals living in groups?
It strongly suggests that, yeah, gregarious behavior. The fact that we're mostly adults and subadults is also intriguing.
How so?
Well, you could speculate maybe they formed groups based on age.
Yeah.
Perhaps for things like lekking,
Lekking, like birds do with mating displays.
possibly. Or maybe just flocking together for safety. Hard to say for sure, but the bone bed evidence points towards some kind of social structure.
It really brings them to life, thinking about them interacting like that. And the preservation itself must have been quite specific.
Oh, absolutely. Probably a rapid burial event, maybe a flood or mud flow that caught them together. Then later erosion exposed the site. A lucky snapshot for us.
And this discovery, this specific group, led to naming a new species.
It did. The fossils from the bone bed were formally described as a separate species, Avimimus nemectensis, in 2018. So we have Avimimus portentosus, the original type species, and now this one.
Wow, okay, so from one incomplete skeleton to a whole flock, essentially. Let's try and picture one. Small, you said.
Yeah, pretty small for a dinosaur, about 1.5 meters long, maybe 5 feet, so
Yeah.
not intimidating in size.
And the head, what was that like?
The skull was quite delicate, actually, small compared to the body. But, and this is cool, it seems to have housed a pretty big brain for its size.
Oh, how do we know that?
The brain case itself, the bones surrounding the brain area, were quite large and robust, suggesting proportionally large brain volume. And the eye sockets were huge, too.
Big eyes, big brain. Potentially quite aware of its surroundings.
You'd think so, yeah. Suggests maybe keen eyesight, perhaps complex behaviors. The opening at the back of the skull, the foramen magnum, was large, but the connection point to the neck, the occipital condyle, was small. Points to a light skull overall.
Interesting. And the bird mimic part, the beak, did it have one?
Well, that's been a bit debated. Kursanov's initial idea was a toothless sort of parrot-like beak,
Okay.
but some later finds, including possibly the Nemegtensis specimens, seem to show evidence of small teeth right at the front of the upper jaw, the premaxilla.
So maybe not entirely toothless then? Or maybe it varied?
Could be variation, or maybe our interpretation is still evolving. It makes guessing the diet tricky, too. Kursanov suggested insects.
Right.
But with a possible beak, maybe some teeth? You could argue for plants. Or maybe it was omnivorous, eating a bit of everything. The jury's still out, really.
Okay, so skull, beak, maybe some teeth. What about the rest of the body? The neck?
The neck was long and slender. Quite graceful, actually. The vertebrae were more stretched out than in other related dinosaurs, the Eoraptorosaurs.
And the back? Anything unusual there?
Yeah, something interesting is what they don't have. The back vertebrae lack the openings, the foramina, that you see in many other theropods, especially more advanced oviraptorids or birds.
Openings for what?
For air sacs. Part of that complex, super efficient respiratory system birds have, which many dinosaurs also had. Their absence in Avimimus might mean its breathing system was a bit more basic, suggesting it's maybe a more primitive member of that oviraptorosaur group.
Huh. Okay, that's a subtle but important clue. Now the limbs, forelimbs, first feathers, that's the big bird connection, right?
It is. The forelimbs themselves were relatively short, and the hand bones, the metacarpals, were fused together, similar to modern birds.
Okay, fused hand bones.
And Kursanov pointed out a ridge on the ulna, one of the forearm bones. He interpreted that as an attachment point for feathers.
Like where the wing feathers would anchor.
Exactly. He even reported seeing quill knobs, little bumps on the bone where feather follicles would sit. Now, the presence of some bumps is generally confirmed, but whether they are definitively quill knobs is still debated by some.
But feathers seem likely overall.
Oh, absolutely. Most paleontologists accept Avimimus was feathered. It fits the pattern from Maniraptoran dinosaurs. But Kursanov went further.
Right, he thought it could fly. Weakly.
He did suggest weak flight capabilities. That was pretty controversial then and isn't the view now. The skeletal structure just doesn't support powered flight.
So feathery, yes. Flying, probably not.
That's the consensus. Feathers for display, maybe insulation, but not for getting airborne.
Got it. What about the lower body, the hips?
The hips were described as exceptionally broad, which is interesting, especially thinking back to when they thought it didn't have a tail. Broad hips often help anchor strong tail muscles for balance.
Ah, so another clue that pointed towards a tail existing.
Could be. And then the legs.
Wow. What about them?
Extremely long and slender, especially the lower leg bones, the shins, compared to the thighs.
And that means?
Runner. That's a classic cursorial adaptation. Animals built for speed often have that long shin, short thigh proportion. Think cheetahs, ostriches.
So Avimimus was likely very fast on its feet.
Very likely. Add in the three-toed feet with narrow, pointy claws. Yeah, it paints a picture of a highly specialized runner zipping across the Cretaceous landscape.
Okay, so small, feathered, big eyes, maybe a beak, long neck, and built like a sprinter. That's quite a creature. How does it fit into the bigger dinosaur picture, evolutionarily speaking?
Well, that's another area where ideas have shifted quite a bit.
Kursanov's original idea was pretty bold, wasn't it? Closer to modern birds than even Archaeopteryx.
It was a really radical idea for the time, placing Avimimus very high up the bird lineage.
But that's not where it sits now.
No. Modern phylogenetic analysis, basically. Using computers to compare lots of anatomical features and figure out family trees, places Avimimus firmly within the Oviraptorosauria.
Okay, and Oviraptorosaurs are?
They're a group of bird-like theropods, often with beaks, feathers, some quite strange looking. But they are considered an earlier branch-off, more primitive on the line towards birds than Archaeopteryx is.
So still very bird-like, but not a direct ancestor in that way.
Exactly. It shows convergent evolution, too, perhaps developing bird-like features independently.
Kursanov felt it was so unique he gave it its own family, right? Avimidae? And even an order.
He did, yeah. Family of Avimidae in 81, and then Sankar Chatterjee proposed the order of Avimiformes in 91, both just for Avimimus.
But those aren't widely used classifications now.
Not really, mainly because for a long time there was effectively only one species recognized. You don't usually create a whole family or order for just one genus if it clearly fits elsewhere.
So where does it fit best now, according to recent studies?
The consensus seems to be nesting it within the broader Oviraptoridae family, or maybe more specifically, a subgroup called the Elmasaurinae, along with things like Elmasaurus and Cadenothacia.
Right, nested groups within groups, like Russian dolls of classification.
Something like that. The cladogram shown in our source, based on analysis from 2007, puts it within a larger group, Canignathoidea, alongside Canignathus, but distinct from dinosaurs like Caudipteryx, which are seen as more basal oviraptorosaurs.
It just shows how complex these relationships are and how they get refined with more data.
Constantly. Every new fossil, every new analysis can potentially shift things around a bit as we try to map that incredibly ancient family tree.
Okay, so let's picture its world. Paleoecology, late Cretaceous, 85 to 70 million years ago, roughly, Mongolia.
Yet fossils mainly linked to the Nemec Formation, maybe also the slightly older Barun-Goyot Formation.
What was that environment like? You mentioned the Nemec, but what about the Barun-Goyot?
The Barun-Goyot is thought to have been pretty arid overall. Sand dunes, maybe some rivers or streams that weren't always flowing, maybe a bit wetter than the Jadakta, where Velociraptor is famously found.
Sounds a bit harsh.
Could be, but it's also known for really good preservation, especially of smaller, more delicate skeletons. So conditions were right sometimes for things to fossilize well.
And Avimimus wasn't alone there, obviously. Who else was around?
Oh, it was a busy place.
Yeah.
Our source lists quite a crowd. You had other small predators like the Maniraptor and Holsampes,
Okay.
several other types of oviraptorosaurs like Conchoraptor. Then you had the Alvarezsaurids, Monicus, Parvicursor, those
Right.
little guys with the weird single claw,
Or the insect specialists.
probably. Plus plant eaters, the dome-headed Pachycephalosaur, Tylocephal, armored ankylosaurs like Cychania and Tarchia, several kinds of horned dinosaurs, ceratopsians like Bigoceratops.
Wow, quite a mix. Any big ones?
Yep, even a titanosaur, one of those huge, long-necked sauropods called Quasiosaurus, and that's just the dinosaurs. Early birds, like Gobicteryx, lizards, some early mammals skittering around, even an amphibian fossil found there, plus eggshells indicating even more dinosaurs were present.
It really sounds like a complete, complex ecosystem.
Absolutely. A dynamic late Cretaceous world.
So wrapping this up, Vimimus, the bird mimic, small, fast, feathered, maybe social dinosaur from Mongolia. Not the direct bird ancestor once thought, but a really interesting member of the bird-like Oviraptorosaur group.
Yeah, its speed adaptations, the potential beak, that bone bed suggesting social life, it all paints a vivid picture. And it's a picture that keeps getting clearer, or at least more detailed, as we find more and analyze more.
Definitely. Which leads us to a final thought for you listening. When you look at a creature like Avimimus with this blend of traits we think of as dinosaur and others we see in birds,
What does that tell you about evolution? About the different paths life can take, the experiments that nature tries out, and maybe more importantly, what else is still out there, waiting to be found, that could completely change the picture again.
it really makes you think about how much we still have to learn about these incredible ancient worlds.